My name is Julia. I'm 34, and my father didn't leave me a penny when he died. But that wasn't the part that broke me. The part that did, he wasn't even dead. No phone call, no funeral, just a cold email with a PDF of his will, and my name missing, like I never existed. Everything went to a fake charity I'd only heard once before, during a tax scandal. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood in line at a grocery store, staring at the screen, realizing my own father had faked his death to erase me. And I almost let it go. Almost. Until a blurry photo showed up in my inbox. Him, alive, laughing, surrounded by people who knew. If you think I stayed buried, you don't know me. Before I show you what came next, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment if you've ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to love you. Now let me take you back to the moment I stopped grieving and started digging. My father didn't leave me a penny when he died. That wasn't the betrayal. The betrayal was, he wasn't even dead. It started with an email. No phone call, no knock on the door, just a sterile, copy-pasted message from a law firm I didn't recognize, with the subject line, Estate Notification of Charles Dalton. Inside, it read like a press release. Mr. Dalton has passed unexpectedly while residing abroad, followed by a long-winded paragraph about his international retirement and quiet final arrangements. No mention of how he died, no funeral details, no condolences, just paperwork, cold, detached, final. Attached to that email was a PDF, his will. I opened it on my phone while standing in the checkout line at a grocery store. The document buzzed to life, page after page of legal jargon and asset distribution. My name wasn't on a single line, not even a footnote, nothing. Not even a passing acknowledgement that I existed. Every cent, every property, every stock and share transferred to a newly formed nonprofit foundation. The name of it stopped me. I'd heard it before. Once. Years ago. It was the name of a shell company he used to hide assets during a tax audit. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I didn't call anyone. I just stood there, frozen between a row of chewing gum and a rack of tabloids, staring at the screen like I just watched myself vanish. People think losing a parent is painful, but let me tell you something crueler. Losing one who's still alive, and who chose to pretend you were already gone. He didn't want me at the funeral. He didn't want me mourning. He wanted me erased, silently, completely. And maybe I would have let it go. Maybe I would have mourned in private, moved on, swallowed the silence, like I had so many times before. But then, something didn't sit right. It was too clean, too orchestrated, too much like him. My father always knew how to disappear behind a curtain of performance, and I'd spent a lifetime learning how to see through it. So, no, I wasn't finished grieving. I was just getting started watching. You've heard of cruel fathers before, but what if yours staged his own death just to erase you? What would you do if your grief was just another one of his games? Don't go anywhere. What I found next will make your skin crawl. I flew to the city where my father had been living, the one he had escaped to after burning every bridge he'd ever crossed. I didn't expect a warm welcome. I didn't expect apologies. But I thought, maybe I'd at least be allowed to say goodbye. A moment, a minute, a seat in the back row of the church, even if no one made eye contact. But there was no church, no obituary in the paper, no public mourning, only whispers of a private gathering, invitation only, for those closest to him. And I wasn't one of them. When I called the law firm again, they refused to take my call. The receptionist said Mr. Knox was in court every day for 2 weeks. When I asked to leave a message, she sighed and hung up. Then my bank app froze. My access to a small shared account, set up in my name decades ago, never touched, was suddenly locked. A red banner popped up. No access. Inactive. Every paper trail leading back to him had been quietly, thoroughly erased. I didn't even exist on the ledger anymore. And that's when it hit me. Not just grief, not even anger, but a suffocating sense of being buried alive. Because that's what he'd done. Not just faked his death, he buried me with it. I was scrolling through my inbox that night when a message came in from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Bridget, an old friend from college who happened to live nearby. She'd heard rumors of a strange gathering at a luxury villa on the coast. "Thought you should see this," she wrote. Attached was a grainy photo she'd snapped from a passing car. Men in suits, women in heels, and there, in the back, blurred but unmistakable, his silver hair, his smirk, the tilt of his chin I'd memorized from childhood reprimands. He was alive, laughing, among people who knew he was alive, while the world thought he was dead. That wasn't just a betrayal. That was a performance, staged so convincingly that the only person truly left out of the script was me. He didn't just cut me out of the will. He staged a funeral where I couldn't grieve, locked every account, silenced every avenue, declared, in effect, that I had no right to mourn, no right to question, no right to exist. They erased me, legally, emotionally, financially. But they forgot I still had a pulse. If you were me, shut out, stripped of every right, and staring at a blurry photo of a funeral that wasn't real, would you walk away? Or would you start digging? Because what I uncovered next was never meant to see the light of day. I went back to my apartment that night with nothing but silence and static buzzing in my chest. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it chokes. I didn't eat. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat on the floor, the folder of legal nothingness still in my hands, and stared at the box I had nearly thrown out months ago. The one labeled Dad's Letters, as if they were worth remembering. I opened it for the first time in years, not out of nostalgia, out of necessity. If he really wanted to vanish, to erase every legal and emotional trace of me, he must have left something behind in plain sight. He always had a flaw for showmanship, a need to feel clever, and I knew him well enough to know he couldn't resist a secret hidden in a performance. And then I found it, folded into the corner of a letter dated 12 years ago. A scrap of lined paper, torn from a hotel notepad, with a name I recognized. Not a person, a company. Elios Renewal Initiative. The same name as the charity that inherited everything. I typed it into my browser and felt my breath catch. Articles from over a decade ago. Whispers of offshore accounts, money laundering investigations, shell corporations buried in tax havens. And then silence. No charges, no trace, just dust kicked under the rug. I needed help. The kind of help you don't get from a lawyer. I called Amira. She wasn't just a journalist. She was a scalpel with a press badge. And years ago, she owed my mother a debt she'd never forgotten. One phone call, and she said, "Tell me where to meet you." Over the next 2 weeks, we tore into every digital footprint, every public record, every email header and device ID linked to his name. We found proof. Proof that the charity had been registered just weeks before his death, with his signature on the document. Proof that IP address tied to his name had been active since, sending emails to overseas accounts. We even found a time-stamped video of him in a private security feed, laughing over dinner with the same people who cried at his funeral. He wasn't a ghost. He was a fraud. And I wasn't confused. I wasn't delusional. And I damn sure wasn't dead. He was. On paper. Up until now, you've seen shadows. But here's where the spotlight turns on. Are you ready to see what happens when a conman father meets a daughter who refuses to play dead? I didn't go to the police. Not yet. Men like my father don't crumble under flashing lights. They dissolve in silence, one paper cut at a time. So I started with the sharpest blade I had, the law. I found a probate attorney who specialized in asset disputes and fraud. He was lean, dry, and had the kind of voice that never rose above a whisper. But his words hit like iron. I laid out everything. The fake charity, the offshore trail, the ghost signatures. His fingers tapped the desk once before he said, "If even half of this holds, we can freeze his assets within a week." And we did. The petition was filed under emergency grounds, fraudulent distribution of an estate pending federal investigation. It was like throwing a wrench into a machine mid-spin. Suddenly, Charles Dalton's precious funds, his sanctuaries in the Caymans, his golden parachutes in Switzerland were under scrutiny. Frozen, untouchable, just like he wanted me to be. But that wasn't enough. I wasn't trying to win in silence. I wanted noise. So I turned to the one institution that scared him more than family, the IRS. I created a burner account, attached every document we had collected, signatures, emails, IP logs, screenshots of the so-called charities website coded to redirect to encrypted accounts, and sent it off with a message that read simply, "You're missing millions." 3 days later, I received confirmation that an investigation had been opened. Not a full victory, but a tremor. The kind that cracks foundations before the whole house caves in. I could almost picture his face when the emails started bouncing, when his bank told him the wire transfer didn't go through. That glimmer of panic, well concealed behind a smirk, but flickering in his eyes like a match about to reach the fuse. He had staged a funeral to shut me out. Now I was inviting the world in. If he wanted a secret funeral, I told Amira, as we outlined our next step, I'll make sure it's his last public appearance. And no, I didn't want justice. I wanted precision. I wanted impact. I wanted to go biblical. You think a secret funeral could cover up a lifetime of lies? I thought so too, until I walked straight into it. Stay with me, because this is where everything they tried to bury starts crawling back to the surface. I arrived in silence, dressed in a muted black apron, a clipboard in one hand, a single white rose in the other. The villa sat like a well-kept lie, perched above the sea, drenched in fake solemnity. From a distance, it could have passed for an art gala or a billionaire's birthday, but the guest list was tight, curated. Everyone inside thought they were safe, that he was safe. I walked through the service entrance with the morning delivery, nodding politely to the caterers, blending in like a shadow. My heart beat like it was counting down. They were already gathered, his closest confidants, the ones who made sure I never got an invite, who thought silence could be bought with charity checks and falsified grief. The lawyer stood near the podium, clearing his throat, holding the will in one hand like it was sacred scripture. I stepped forward slowly, with purpose, and climbed the 3 marble steps to the front. Nobody recognized me at first. Why would they? I wasn't meant to exist. I wasn't in the obituary. I wasn't in the will. But the moment I pulled out my phone and tapped play, the air fractured. His voice, clear as daylight, conversational, casual, discussing bank routes, clearing delays, laughing. Last week's date blinking on the top corner of the screen. Every eye turned toward the casket, then toward him, sitting in the 3rd row, disguised under tinted glasses and arrogance. His face didn't move at first. Then the blood drained. He blinked once, twice, then turned sharply, whispering something to the man beside him. But the whispers couldn't stop the recording. I turned to the crowd and projected the next act onto the massive screen behind me. Bank records, transfer logs, names, amounts, all tied to the charity, all stolen from real people, real victims, some of them in that very room. I watched the shift spread like a virus. First confusion, then shock, then disgust. His lawyer dropped the folder. The front row mourner, an old business partner, stood up, visibly shaken. A woman clutched her purse tighter, whispering into her phone. And Charles Dalton? He stood halfway, as if to run, but sat back down just as quickly when he realized there was no exit that didn't go through me. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Nothing. He didn't die. He ran. And I made sure there was nowhere left to hide. He went silent. What would you do if the man who faked his own death looked you in the eye, only to realize you had the upper hand? What I did next wasn't just revenge. It was legacy, justice, and a message too loud to ignore. After the funeral descended into chaos and silence wrapped itself around my father like a noose of his own making. I didn't vanish. I became louder, without raising my voice. 2 days later, I sat in a dimly lit co-working space with nothing but my laptop, a burner email, and a thumb drive labeled only with one word: redemption. One click at a time, I composed the list: his fake heirs, his shell partners, the journalist who once fawned over his philanthropic facade, and the investigators I knew would smell blood at first bite. Each of them received the same message. No greeting, no context, just a file calmly titled Redemption, TXT. Inside was the video of him speaking from his afterlife, time-stamped days after his so-called death. Alongside it, financial spreadsheets detailing a river of money siphoned through fake charities, funneled from desperate families into offshore dens. And at the end, a single line written in bold, centered, unwavering: the dead don't send wire transfers, but thieves do. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. Some truths don't require a narrator. They only need to be seen. But I wasn't finished. Not until I could plant a flag in the very heart of his deception. 2 weeks later, I signed a lease on the office suite directly next to his so-called foundation. Floor-to-ceiling windows, open blinds, clear view. I paid extra to have a handcrafted wood sign made. Black letters carved deep into white oak hung just above the glass door where every associate, every donor, every liar would have to pass by and see it every single day. It read, "The truth he tried to bury. No press release, no announcement, just presence. Quiet, deliberate, inescapable." Every time someone walked into that charity with questions, they walked by me first. Every time a reporter came sniffing for answers, they found my door already open. I didn't confront him again. I didn't have to. I just existed, loudly, uncomfortably, permanently, in the shadow he thought he could erase. Because sometimes, the cleanest revenge is being impossible to ignore. You might think the story ends once the fraud is exposed. But what about the damage it left behind? What about the healing? Stick around, because now comes the part most people never talk about. The part where you rebuild. The first morning after it was all over, I didn't wake up to tension gripping my chest. I didn't check my phone for threats disguised as formalities or emails from faceless lawyers trying to steal one more piece of my sanity. I woke up to the scent of jasmine tea, steeping slowly beside the open window, and for the first time in what felt like years, I heard myself breathe, and I didn't flinch. No, I didn't get everything back, but I got enough. Enough to reclaim a home with no ghosts in the walls. Enough to start again, without apology. I moved into a quiet town 2 hours from the city, where the mailman still knows your name and neighbors drop off muffins without needing a reason. I planted herbs on my windowsill: basil, mint, and lavender. The lavender bloomed first. It felt like something inside me had too. There's a small office above a bakery on Main Street with my name etched modestly on the glass. The Dalton Foundation. Legal aid for the silenced. Every Tuesday, the door is open to anyone who's been betrayed by blood, abandoned by systems, or gaslit into silence. We don't wear suits. We wear kindness. Sometimes, justice begins with simply saying, "I believe you." Some weeks, I brew tea for women who've lost everything to charming liars in their family. Some nights, I help them write letters to people who'll never apologize but who need to hear the truth anyway. There's no rage in me now, only clarity. We laugh, we cry, we drink tea that's been steeped too long, and together, we plant new roots. My niece visits on weekends. She's 16 and smarter than I ever was at that age. We sit in the backyard, playing cards under string lights and stars. She told me once, "You're the bravest person I know." I just smiled and said, "Bravery's just what's left when you run out of fear." I see her sometimes, staring at the lavender, now wild and reaching. "Do you ever miss him?" she asked me one night, the question hanging in the air like smoke. I thought about the lies, the manipulation, the games that cost me years, and then I thought about the silence now, the peace of The fact that I can speak without flinching. No, I said softly, but I miss who he could have been. Forgiveness never arrived like thunder. It came in teaspoons, brewed slow, poured warm, sipped with patience. Some wounds don't scar over, but they do stop bleeding. 2 weeks ago, I bought a wooden bench and placed it outside the foundation. Carved into the backrest were 5 words. Justice didn't make me rich. And beneath them, in smaller letters only visible when sunlight hit just right, but it made me free. I still walk by that bench sometimes, even when I'm not working. I sit there with a cup of tea and let strangers sit beside me. If they want. Sometimes they talk, sometimes they just breathe. But always, they feel seen. My story began in grief and ended in light. I didn't win back everything he stole, but I won myself back. And in the end, that was the only inheritance that mattered. Do you believe people like him ever feel regret? I didn't think so. Until I saw how silence can be louder than prison bars. What happened to him next is something no courtroom could ever sentence. He didn't vanish all at once. No, men like my father rot slowly, from the inside out. After the funeral was exposed for the sham it was, after the headlines screamed his name alongside words like fraud, conspiracy, and wire fraud scheme, Charles Dalton no longer walked into rooms with applause. He stopped walking into rooms altogether. The doors no longer opened for him. His old associates, once eager to sit at his table and laugh at his jokes, suddenly remembered ethics. The ones who weren't being investigated turned their backs. The ones who were, lawyered up and cut him out like gangrene. His foundation crumbled first. The marble plaque outside was quietly removed in the dead of night. The staff disappeared in a week. The phone stopped ringing, and the email auto-reply was changed to a curt legal notice. Then came the freezing of accounts, one by one, properties seized, cars repossessed, a lifetime of empire building reduced to red stamps and silence. I didn't seek him out. I didn't have to. I let the truth echo louder than vengeance ever could. And still, he found ways to crawl into the corners of my life, one final time. The message came at 3:12 a.m. 4 words. No punctuation. No explanation. You were always watching. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew I wouldn't say anything. I let the silence respond. I let him sit in it. They say loneliness isn't the absence of people. It's the presence of shame with nowhere to run. That was the cell my father lived in now. No walls, no locks, just the haunting weight of who he'd become, and who had finally seen him for it. I heard he moved between motels under false names. I heard he tried to sell one of his watches to a friend of a friend who pretended not to recognize him. I heard that when reporters showed up at his last known address, the curtains never moved and no lights came on. His house, his real one, the mansion with the grand staircase and portraits of himself, stood empty for months until the bank repossessed it. Grass grew through the cracks in the driveway. The mailbox leaned to the side like even it had given up. People used to throw cocktail parties there. Now, teenagers dared each other to break in just to feel the chill in the walls. And still, no charges had come yet. But he was already sentenced. By isolation, by ruin, by the slow, excruciating death of relevance. His name no longer opened doors. It closed them. One neighbor said they saw him once, hunched in the back seat of a beat-up sedan, head down, trying not to be seen. But they knew it was him, because guilt makes even the proudest man shrink into something unrecognizable. I never spoke about him publicly. I never needed to. The truth had already carved its initials into every room he walked into. He couldn't make eye contact with the mirror anymore, let alone with the world. Once, someone asked me if I hated him. I said no, because hate still gives someone space in your mind. I gave him nothing. No responses, no press statements, no name to curse. I gave him exactly what he tried to give me in death, erasure. And it worked. By the time the Department of Justice officially launched proceedings, no one showed up to support him. No one offered to post bail. Even his lawyer, that smug little man with the red tie, Submitted a resignation letter so brief, it read more like a footnote. My father died a long time ago, long before he faked it. But now, finally, he had to live with the echo of his own name, stripped of power, drained of dignity, and remembered only by the mess he left behind. And that, I think, is the cruelest mercy of all. He lived, just long enough to watch himself disappear. Some people write their legacy in money. Others, like me, write it in truth. And if you've followed me this far, I want you to feel what real power sounds like when it chooses not to bow. I rewrote my will last month. There was no lawyer present, just me, a fountain pen, and a quiet afternoon where the sun spilled across the kitchen tiles like honey. I didn't leave anything to legacies built on threats or love negotiated through fear. I didn't write names out of revenge. I wrote them out of clarity. Every cent, every asset, every ounce of value that remained after truth swept through the house like a cleansing fire. I assigned it to people who had never asked me to bleed to prove I was family. To the young paralegal who helped file evidence when no firm dared take my case, I left her a scholarship. To the housekeeper who once slipped a note into my bag that simply said, "I believe you." I left her the keys to the small beach cottage I inherited from my grandmother, the one my father never managed to sell. To a community fund for whistleblowers, my father's antique watch collection, sold in pieces, not as heirlooms, but as tools for truth. On the first page of the will, before the names and signatures and seals, I wrote one sentence in ink the color of rusted iron. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering and choosing not to bow. That line wasn't written for the courts. It wasn't written for those who'd read my estate. It was written for the girl I once was. The girl who bent herself into silence to survive. The girl who once stood at the edge of her father's shadow, thinking love was something you had to earn by enduring. I wanted her to know she was wrong, and that she was finally free. I don't give interviews. I don't go on talk shows, or sit across from cameras dissecting trauma for ratings. My voice doesn't need to echo. It only needs to reach those who've been silenced. These days, I run quiet workshops in community centers. Nothing flashy, nothing branded, just tables, tea, and the stories of people reclaiming their names. We don't talk about villains. We talk about survival. We talk about boundaries that hold. We talk about how healing isn't a straight line. It's a messy, beautiful garden, and every scar is a root that held on. Sometimes I get letters, survivors, daughters, sons, people who lived under the rule of someone else's lie and finally found the breath to say, "No more." They thank me like I lit the path, but all I did was refuse to keep my eyes shut. One evening, my niece asked what it feels like to win without destroying someone. I looked at her, this brilliant, fierce reflection of everything I'd hoped the world would protect, and I told her, it feels like exhale. My father once told me, power is about control. I've learned that real power is walking away, whole. And when I die, I want that to be the story told. Not the betrayal, not the money, not the lies that tried to choke my name out of history. I want the final line of my legacy to be simple, unwavering. She didn't break, she rebuilt. Tonight, I made tea with fresh ginger and honey. I stepped out onto the balcony just as the wind curled off the ocean like a sigh. Below me, the street was quiet. A child laughed somewhere in the distance. The sea, in its eternal rhythm, whispered against the rocks. I leaned against the railing, cupping warmth between my palms, and watched the sky shift from blue to burnished gold. There was no music, no applause, just breath. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need anything else. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it moved something in you, if it made you think about justice, about truth, or about your own family, leave me a comment below. Like the video, subscribe. There are more stories waiting to be told, and you deserve to hear every one of them.